Houston, Dynamo, Portland Timbers, Sporting Kansas, Los Angeles Galaxy,
Beach Pass.
Toronto FC, Salt Lake, Chicago Fire, Columbus Crew, FC Dallas, New York Red Bulls.
Pitch Pass, your all-access credential to the people that matter in MLS. Here's your host, Greg Roach.
Welcome to the last scheduled episode of Pitch Pass for the year. I say scheduled because it's been a wild and crazy ride since the season ended, which was just a couple of days ago. So if something huge happens or a number of mini or major things happen, we'll probably churn out an episode or two sometime in December or maybe even January. But this is the last official one until we start ramping up again for MLS 2014. And we figured we'd end up or we'd wrap the season with two of our favorite guests to have on and have them do a little recap on 2013 and look ahead to 2014 and maybe do some speculation on some things that have happened already and could happen this offseason. So from Comcast Sportsnet Houston, Sebastian Salazar will join us later on. But first, as he's known as on Twitter, or at least as he categorizes himself on Twitter, the other Sports Illustrated soccer writer, Brian Straus, joins us right now. Brian, good to talk to you, my friend. How are you?
I'm well, man. I am in post-MLS Cup cage. This is always an odd week, sort of at the very end of the season, and just kind of like gather yourself and process what has just occurred.
It's interesting. We are probably the only two guys in the D.C. area not talking about RG3 and Kirk Cousins right now.
Well, I don't know if we've ever talked about this, but after I don't know what it is, a dozen years of watching this team implode and watching the culture of this organization rot from within, or I guess rot from the top, I have mentally and emotionally divorced myself from the Redskins. My fandom is now basically reminiscing. That's what I do. I think about being a kid and watching that organization and those players. You think back to Riggins and Monk and Darryl Green and the Hogs and the people I worshipped as a kid, and that's where I go when I want to think about football. Dan Snyder has destroyed everything that I loved, and I just don't pay attention anymore.
So you don't have sources that can confirm or dish some details on what's going on behind the scenes like you do in soccer, in the world of soccer?
No, I have no sources. As a matter of fact, like I said, I've disconnected even further. I don't even know if I'd go to I certainly won't spend any money supporting Dan Snyder, and quite frankly, at this point, I'm not even sure I'd go to a Redskins game for free. Not that anyone has offered.
I would like to ask you about the Christ situation. I know you're not a pat on yourself on the back kind of guy, and I will pat you on the back, and I know you will then immediately brush my hand away. But nice work.
Don't touch me, Greg.
Please, hands off. Nice work breaking that story. And, you know, I've read some things that you have written since then, and it's just, you know, hey, somebody told me, I'm just passing along information.
That's all it is.
That's my job. All it is. But, yeah, that's fine. But you're also the one who has to take all the flack, and in this case, the tweet from Jason Christ himself kind of belittling you for even bringing it up because it's such a non-story. And, you know, look, you're not going to say it, but at some part of your body or your being, it does feel a little bit vindicated to go, hey, man, maybe I wasn't just kind of throwing stuff out there that meant nothing.
To be honest, no, I don't feel vindicated.
You don't.
I know. This is we're only as good or as bad as the people who talk to us, and all I did in this case, and in some more celebrated and or infamous cases earlier this year. You know, you just relay what people tell you, and that's all it is. I had no idea what Christ was going to do. I talked to people and you know, people I trusted and simply relayed their information. I mean, I have nothing but, and I'm not just saying this. I mean, I have as much respect for Jason Christ as someone in my position can have for someone in his position. I mean, he sat down with me in March when RSL was here in D.C., and he gave me one of the best interviews I've ever had. He was phenomenal, and he's bright, and he's ambitious, and congratulations to him NYCFC could have had pretty much anybody, and they gunned for him hard, and you know, made him the traditional offer he couldn't refuse. And no, I mean, it's not about me at all, and if I wish more people understood. I mean, I really, really took it hard from a lot of RSL fans during the week because of a tweet I sent out. And I guess if rather than patting myself on the back or thinking it's about me, what I'd love to do is sort of help people understand how our business works and, you know, get them to realize that we don't have an agenda. There's no conspiracy. If we hear news, we report it, and we report it when we hear it. And that's all it is. And there are no favorites being played. And it's actually quite a lot more simple than people think it is. And so that bothered me. I don't like being out there and sort of the target of things. But I guess that comes with the territory, and maybe it's something I'll have to learn to be more comfortable with.
Here's an interesting thing that I am taking away, at least from the first few hours, days of the narrative that we're getting. And if it's true, it's a new realm for MLS, and that is, one of the reasons Jason Kreis took the position with NYCFC. Obviously, bigger markets. I'm sure he'll have more funds available. But the other thing that people are talking about now is, okay, well, this is also a window to him getting to Europe, and if he's successful working under European owners, it'll make it a little easier for him to go to Europe. And that's not something that we have seen for MLS. We always hear about players trying to get to Europe, but we always know that probably in the back of our minds, coaches would take a European gig. But this is the first time it's kind of publicly been out there of, hey, here's a guy taking a position with maybe the undercurrent being a gateway into Europe. And I think that's kind of cool for MLS because it's the next step.
I thought for a while now that this is the last frontier in a way for American soccer. Is we're slowly convincing them we can play the game, but it's still tough to convince them we know the game. And there's a big difference, and that even comes across when if I'm at an international event and I talk to foreign journalists, or I see other Americans talk to foreign journalists, and you sort of I found myself saying, I started playing when I was 5. I was a licensed coach. I've been involved in the game for as long as you have, and we do know it over here. And obviously I never played or coached as a pro. And then when you think about the guys who've been immersed in the game for so long, who played around the world, who played in big tournaments, it is time that they get recognized for the manner in which they understand and process the game. I mean, if Bruce Arena wasn't American and coached a team at our sort of traditional level to the World Cup quarterfinals, and it was any other team, and he was from any other country, are you telling me he wouldn't have gotten a job offer in Europe?
Yeah.
Bob Bradley wins a World Cup group that includes England, beats Spain in the Confederations Cup, does what he does with Egypt, with all of those ridiculous odds against him. And I'm a Sheffield Wednesday fan. That's my foreign club, and Wednesday just fired their coach. I would love it if when a second-tier team in England, perhaps plunging to the third, I would love it if Wednesday would gun after Bradley, and you would think a guy with that resume would be of interest, but it just doesn't seem to be the case. And I think it's the last glass ceiling, for American soccer to convince them that we can think the game too.
In my mind, this is a situation, almost a no-lose situation for Jason Kreis, in that he will have the clout of Manchester City behind him. The first thing that I'm reading is that he'll go and kind of do some time with the technical staff for Manchester City. But even if he's not successful here, I don't believe it would tarnish his reputation in MLS. It's not going to prohibit him from getting another job. So what is the leap of faith that he is taking by taking this position?
It's a good question. I mean, I think you have to start with the fact is what was there left to accomplish at RSL, and you could certainly, in the short term, say, they lost too many finals. It would have been great to have won another trophy, and they certainly know that. They're very conscious of their legacy there, and I have no doubt that the loss on Saturday in Kansas City was really, really painful. But in the broader sense, in the sense of building a club, of building a culture, demonstrating this season that it could be repeated, losing players and plugging new players in and bringing players along and creating that sort of cultural and technical conveyor belt. He proved that. And you could argue that, another year or two at RSL doing the same thing, would that be different? Would that tell us something different about him? He is a very, very ambitious guy. And I believe that he had very limited opportunities with the national team as a player. I think he thought that was unfair. I mean, this was an MLS MVP we're talking about. And I think he has a chip on his shoulder from feeling like he didn't get as far as he could have or should have or deserved as a player. And he really, really wants to prove himself as a coach. And this is the next chance to do that. This is a chance to go to a club with a lot more pressure, a lot more resources, a much bigger spotlight. He's separating himself from Garth Lagerwey, his longtime friend and GM. And while they have a great relationship, I'm sure, and of course will remain friends, this is also a chance for Jason to sort of prove himself alone in a way and not with his sort of tag team partner. So for all those reasons, this was the next step he had to take in his career in order to prove that he could. And whether that step after that is Europe or the U.S. national team or whatever, I think he needed something in between to sort of pave the way. And this makes perfect sense. And although he leaves behind a place he loved to live, a place his family loved to live, a place where he's adored, a place where he had tenure, a place where he had a system in place, a developmental system, a scouting system, an identification system, all of these things, the chance to start from scratch and prove himself on that stage is going to put him in conversation for those bigger and bigger jobs. And so in that sense, he kind of had to do it. And when I was doing reporting on the story, that's what kind of kept coming back to me, that this isn't about money. Deloy Hansen can afford the guy. It's about his ambition and what he thinks he needs to do to get to the next level. And that's New York, man. I mean, that's where the spotlight is.
We've raised a skeptical eye, and I'm saying we because you and I have done it on this podcast, about the NYCFC plan, and especially their marketing plan. But, having said that, you do have to give them their due. These are guys not from MLS, and historically in the league, outsiders to the league have done things kind of wrong every step of the way. But they've hired an American technical director in Claudio Reyna. They have now hired a born and bred MLS guy, player, coach in Jason Kreis. See, you got to kind of give them their credit where credit is due in saying that, at least from a standpoint of what we as Americans would prefer our league be, they're doing it right to start.
I agree, and that's why when people, and maybe I've done it, maybe I'm a bit guilty of this, but when people moan a little bit about whether or not this is going to be a Man City farm team, or oh my God, are they going to wear the same uniforms, and why did they have Vincent Kompany and Cunagero and that video of them juggling around New York City? When you get to the big decisions, when you get to the things that they've done so far to establish an identity, you're 100% right. It couldn't be more American than Claudio Reyna and Jason Kreis. So that's why, as far as I'm concerned, they get the benefit of the doubt. And look, when I interviewed the commissioner last week in Kansas City, he said over and over that he has 100% faith in these people. He didn't have to sort of gush about Ferran Soriano. It wasn't really within the parameters of the conversation, but he did. I mean, he really, really thinks this guy is brilliant and really thinks they're going to do things the right way. And so, like you said, I mean, so far they've been tilting the right direction in the sense of building an American identity. And so, yeah, I give him the benefit of the doubt until we see otherwise.
You had an in-depth conversation with the commissioner, which you can read at Sports Illustrated. What was the point for you that kind of stuck with you? Being maybe you wanted to get a little deeper in and you just didn't have time, or an interesting fact that he threw out. What was the thing that stuck out to you the most in your conversation with him?
That's a good question. I tweeted this earlier. I was bummed. It was just sort of an aside question, but I was bummed that he said that he and Sunil Gulati and U.S. Soccer and MLS and the people that run the game in this country hadn't considered bidding for the Club World Cup. And the Club World Cup is starting today, and I think it's a great tournament, and I think it would be awesome if it was in the U.S. So that's a small thing, but it pops to mind. I mean, obviously, the thing that popped out was when the commissioner called the Chivas USA his biggest failure as commissioner. And that was a pretty dramatic admission for me, and kind of really, spoke to the depth that this thing has sunk, that this is no longer, I talked to, or during the course of the year, and especially after that HBO special came out, I talked to, I think two sort of club owner types, and asked them, how they felt about Chivas USA, and sort of the message that got back was, we're worried about selling tickets for Saturday. Chivas USA, they knew it was bad. They knew it was a problem. But, when people wonder how can the owners not be up in arms about what's going on, it's because they're trying to run their own clubs. They're trying to figure out, where to find players and where to find fans and where to find TV revenue. And they're worried about the day-to-day operation of their own teams. And it's hard really when you're immersed in that to get the bigger picture. But that bigger picture's really hit home. And for Garber to admit that that was his biggest failure in his, 14 years on the job, is pretty significant. And I would hope that they've now realized that something has to change, that inertia is just going to continue carrying this thing to the bottom of the ocean unless they make a drastic change. And, Vergara's not going to sell. He's sitting on an asset that's worth a lot more than he paid for it. And it's going to continue to appreciate as the league grows. The league certainly wants a second team in LA. To me, and I know you agree, rebranding is the minimum. They have to rebrand this club. And then after that, and this is where I disagreed with the commissioner, they're going to have to figure out a way, going back to why I can't tolerate the Redskins anymore. He says Vergara's a smart man, and Garber's not the guy firing coaches and firing presidents and creating so much upheaval. They're going to have to figure out a way for Vergara to perhaps continue to be the owner, but for someone else to come in and really run this team professionally, so this can become an actual contributing professional soccer club instead of the train wreck that it seems to be every day.
So is the league stuck with Vergara as an owner until he decides otherwise?
Yes. Well, here's the thing. There's a tiny caveat. I asked Mark Abbott, the president, MLS president, about this, and he did say sort of like, well, we have rules that every owner needs to follow. So the hint there is that if Vergara breaks a rule, that perhaps there's some kind of remedy for that. And I don't know whether or not, being found guilty of, racial discrimination in employment would constitute any of MLS's rules. Maybe it would. But yeah, unless there's some kind of, but then they would have to file a lawsuit, I guess. I don't know. I'm not a lawyer, but yes, for all intents and purposes, they're stuck with Vergara unless Vergara wants to sell. And I had someone tell me over the summer that he wants at least $100 million to sell the club, and I guess no one has made that offer.
It's funny because you basically just said that Vergara is on double secret probation, and that's where we're at right now.
Well, Anthony Precourt bought the Columbus Crew for just under $70 million. So if you can get into the league for under 70, then you're not going to pay 100 plus for a team that, look, let's be honest. This team has to overcome years and years of ineptitude and years of souring fans against the product. Okay. I just don't see how it's savable.
Okay, well then how about this? This is a much likelier scenario. The Manchester City people just paid $100 million to launch an expansion team in New York City. Would it stand to reason that $100 million just to buy a team in Los Angeles and do a rebrand is just as much, maybe less of an undertaking than what they're taking on in New York City?
I don't know. They still have to build a stadium. I mean, a lot of people think that part of Chivas' problem is sharing the stadium with the Galaxy. So, maybe it's a little easier to build in Southern California. It's more spread out. Maybe there's a few more, chunks of land available. I don't know. I would consider turning Chivas around in some ways, perhaps even more difficult than starting from scratch, just because of all of the bad blood and the negativity that surrounds that brand now. They're impossible to take seriously. All it is at this point, like I said, is an asset in Vergara's portfolio. You can't even consider them, a competitive professional sports concern at this point. It's not.
Let's talk a little bit about the season that just passed, or the season that was. Any big storylines stand out to you as something that, maybe 2-3 years down the road we'll go, oh yeah, 2013, this is when that happened? For starters, the U.S. national team's, turnaround and then resurgence under Klinsmann this year for me is the story of the year. The absolutely remarkable run that they had, getting guys like Josie Altidore, scoring goals almost at will, finishing first in the heck, storming to the Gold Cup title. When this team was on the rocks over the winter, and that's really impressive and a testament to Jurgen for working through it, and a testament to the players for sort of figuring out what he was about and what he wanted, and making peace with it and going out and doing it, getting results. And to me, that's the story of the year, and credit on all fronts. Obviously, Dempsey, signing with Seattle is massive. It's a huge coup for the league, and to get a bit nerdy about it, the fact that we had owners
combine resources and agree to help fund this acquisition really sort of speaks well of the camaraderie in the league and the understanding that a rising tide lifts all boats. And I'm sure some had to grit their teeth knowing that Dempsey was going to Seattle, but they realized that it was for the betterment of the league that he come. And so that's a big deal as well. And then I guess the other thing that sort of really came to mind when I was in Kansas City at the final, and speaks to Chivas and speaks to the Redskins, is how we're really seeing clubs and organizations in MLS differentiate themselves with the way they're run, the kind of people they hire, the kind of coaches they hire, and how it's so nice to see separation in philosophy and results as this league matures. And to me, what people lamented Kansas City and RSL in the final, to me, those are the two best run organizations in the league, and they're in the final, and that's the way it should be. And you see some teams, DC, Chivas, Toronto, on the rocks because they can't get their act together, and you see the Red Bulls and the Timbers turn themselves around by hiring the right people to coach their team. I love following that. I love kind of seeing the decisions different clubs make and how they profit or lose depending on them. And I think it's fun for the league to have those kinds of stories and personalities and trajectories involved that you can follow.
Yeah, and I talk a lot, and I know a lot is written about MLS 2.0. I don't know if we're in MLS 2.0 or maybe MLS 2.5 before we get to the 3.0, but this year for me felt like I don't want to say a breakthrough year, but definitely a moving up this mountain that we are climbing, and getting to the next plateau, which is a more fulfilling or satisfying one as an American soccer fan. You mentioned the Timbers, Caleb Porter translating his success from the college level to the professional level, and not being kind of down by the under 20 experience or the World Cup team experience. Mike Petke emergency. Just seeing the guys who kind of cut their teeth in MLS as players transitioning into coaches, and not just coaches but successful coaches, so that, like we talked about earlier, you don't need to go outside the country to find coaches who can succeed in this league. To me, was a huge breakthrough for the last few years and this season especially.
I agree, and it just occurred to me. You know what else was like a bonkers story this year?
What?
Do you remember when a U.S. national team player came out of the closet, retired, and then a couple of months later decided he wanted to play, but only if it could be for his hometown team, and then he was traded for the guy who eventually became the MLS MVP? That's a crazy story.
And here's the thing, and I do have something I've wanted to say on that, and I don't know if you want to comment on it or not, but, to me, the fact that it was a huge story for as short amount of time as it was, to me, is the most enjoyable part of that story. And I'm hoping that next year we start judging Robbie Rogers by his results on the pitch. Which
I think we were. No, I think very quickly the story became, was that the right trade?
Yeah, exactly.
Like as McGee started pouring in goals, and the Galaxy flipped a bit and obviously didn't defend their title, and McGee wins the MVP, which I think is deserved. For those who say McGee shouldn't have won because Chicago didn't make the playoffs, with McGee on the Fire, if you prorate their results, they finished with the best record in the league. They would have won the Supporters' Shield at that rate. So them not making the playoffs was not on McGee. No, I think I agree with you, and I think it even was the story for a good chunk of this year when people were debating whether or not the Galaxy should have made that trade because Rogers wasn't great and McGee was. I think it's important to realize that McGee's desire to get back to Chicago was as acute as Rogers' desire to return and play for LA. So Arena was in a tight spot there because not only did Rogers want to come back, and was it a great opportunity for the Galaxy to give him that chance, but McGee wanted to go.
Yeah,
and so he didn't have much of a choice. But the debate was great. And again, if you think about it in the terms that I sort of used at the beginning, it's bonkers. It's crazy that this happened.
Yes.
And it's absolutely something memorable that occurred in 2013.
And McGee getting home, here's the thing. McGee getting home is one thing, but the Galaxy getting value back from that trade is a whole different other thing. And if the value they got back was having the first openly gay professional athlete in the United States on your team, that value didn't translate to success on the field, and thus that wasn't worth it at the end of the day.
Well, you're looking at a guy like Rodgers, who obviously, when he was a big part of the Crew's title in '08, was a contributing national team member. Well, scored the first goal for the U.S. under Klinsmann against Mexico. But he went to England and he struggled with injuries. I think he had an ankle issue. I think he had a concussion, and obviously he may have been struggling with his personal issues as well, and that may have weighed on him. But the Galaxy rolled the dice on a player who had dealt with some injuries and may or may not have been the same player he was. And teams do that, and if he had been the same player he was, then you look at it as a good trade. But so far he hasn't been, and yes, that is the story, that he hasn't been, and McGee was. And again, I was just thinking of something else that 2013 may be remembered for.
Totally.
And look, it's as much that it's the trade. It's the same way people talked about the Di Rosario, Dax McCarty trade. It's just a trade that altered the fortunes of two teams, long term and short term. In the first year, DC United was the big winner of that trade, and now who's the big winner of that trade?
Yeah.
It's just fun to talk about.
Fantastic point, Brian. Fantastic point. Let's look ahead to 2014. I brought up Caleb Porter's successful transition to MLS as being a big story for 2013. Does that story get even greater for 2014? And the fact that Portland Timbers now, I don't want to say pole position for early favorite for next season, but definitely one of the handful of teams that you're going to throw out as a contender for MLS Cup.
Oh, I think they're the favorite. I think they start as the favorite. I certainly think there's a couple issues, of course, they have to address. They're not a perfect team. They've got some. I think they've got to deal with some problems in back. I think we saw against Salt Lake in the conference finals that their back four, and especially the guys in the middle, were exposed a bit, and that's something they need to deal with. There's a very good chance, we'll know Friday, that they'll be in the CONCACAF Champions League next year, next summer and fall. So that's something they're going to have to juggle that club and that organization hasn't. But when you look at the issues with the other teams in that conference, Salt Lake losing Christ, the Galaxy, their DP allotment is filled. This is the team they have. I guess certainly some of their younger guys like Giassi Artis will get better. And Seattle, who the hell knows? Some real chemistry issues with that team toward the end of the season, and Siggy's got some work to do. So based upon trajectory, based upon what we saw this year, if Portland can turn a few of those ties into wins, you think of them as real Supporter Shield favorites. You think of them perhaps in position to host MLS Cup at Jeld-Wen Field. They're the favorites going in, no question.
Okay, so let me ask you this. This will be an interesting point. For a long time, we have seen Western Conference dominance in MLS, even so far as teams that even aren't in the West who should be.
Even the Eastern teams that do well.
Exactly.
No kidding.
Could we be seeing that pendulum start to swing the other way? As you mentioned, the Galaxy situation, the Sounders situation, RSL needing to reload with a new coach. Meanwhile, on the Eastern Conference side, you still have Houston and Kansas City. You've got an emerging New England team.
Those are Western teams.
I know they are, but
they're Western teams.
In 2 years, we can have that conversation. But for now, they're in the East, along with New England and along with a Red Bull team. Could the balance of power, at least for the next season, be swinging to the Eastern Conference?
No, I don't think so.
Not at all.
I think Houston. I think Houston's got a couple moves to make. I think Sporting certainly deserves their title, but again, that's a team with some issues. Starting up front, they still haven't really solved the situation up top. Whether Dom Dwyer leaves or stays, whether Claudio Bielor leaves or stays. Peter Vermes has some work to do. The Red Bulls, Thierry Henry's not getting any younger. They're going to have to make some salary cap decisions coming up. Look, the Revs are going to be fun to watch. Obviously they've lost their goalkeeper. Matt Reese is retired, but they got a lot of young talent. Diego Fagundes. We're going to learn a lot about the Revs when someone from Europe goes to the crafts with a blank check for Diego Fagundes, and whether or not they make the move to keep him. He could be a singular talent, and whether they make the move to keep him or whether they sort of, sell him and sort of send the message again that winning MLS Cup is not their first priority. That's going to be real fascinating to see. But no, I think the top teams will be in the West, and I think, we're going to be looking at unproven teams like like the Reds. You see what Greg Berhalter does with the Crew. Will he have a Caleb Porter-like effect on that organization? I think our perception of Columbus is going to change under this new ownership, and I don't know that it will happen that first year, but it'll be fun to watch. Obviously, DC's in transition. Montreal could be in transition.
Yeah.
Not sure what to think of Philadelphia. So, the top teams and the top players still seem to be in the West, either geographically or officially.
Do you think Fagundes, an offer comes in the off season?
Oh, I don't know that it comes now. I just feel like eventually he's the sort of guy. Louis Gill's the same way. I mean, I don't know if there are any players in the league that I'm more excited to watch next season than Gill and Fagundes.
It's funny that you say Gill. I mean, Fagundes, I've been kind of trumpeting, just seeing a glimpse of him as a 16-year-old, and last year was the year he emerged. Do you consider the 2013 the year that Gill emerged? And if not, is 2014 the year that we're going to really be wowed by him?
Yeah, I mean, again, who knows with the coaching situation, but yeah, I mean, this was the year he became a full-time pro, and that's one step. And then the next step is to be a pro who can consistently make his presence felt game in, game out. And as long as Javier Morales is in Salt Lake, Gill will not be the focal point of an attack as much as perhaps he's capable of being down the road. He's still a kid. And again, I mean, Fagundes was born in Uruguay, but moved here when he was 5 or 6 or so. But again, this is identification and development and finding these kids who 10, 15 years ago we maybe wouldn't have found. And that's what's exciting about this. And, if there's one Luis Gil and one of these Fagundes out there, there's probably more of them. And that's another good sign for the league, and I'm really looking forward to watching these guys.
This week, post-MLS Cup, it's shown that there really is no offseason, especially for guys like you. So I won't say have a good offseason. I'll just say try to recharge as much as you can before it's crazy.
We got to get you to the Cup next year. How you see in the NFL and you see like the radio guys hanging out at a table.
A radio row, yes.
Yeah, you have a taser, right? And the guy walks by and you tase him, and he sits down and you make him speak words into the microphone, and you should be that guy, man. That would be so cool.
I'll talk to Kyle Sheldon, see if it's in the pitch pass budget.
So yeah, no, I mean you're right. There's no off season. I'm hoping January is usually my chance to take a little vacation, but of course we've got nothing planned because that's impossible. So we're gonna have to stow away in a wheel well.
And you got a camp, a men's national team camp coming up too in January. It's an important one.
I've never covered that just because I'm in DC and it's in LA, and I've worked places that'll send me to the big games, but I've never worked anywhere that'll send me to a camp across the country. Maybe in a World Cup year that'll change.
Exactly.
But it's been fun. I mean, we've already started planning. I mean, I was up in New York. Thanksgiving week, that Monday, Tuesday, we've already started talking about World Cup plans for SI, and I couldn't, not that you asked, but I couldn't be happier than working there. It's just great people, and they really value good work, and they're ambitious, and they're nice, and it's going well, and Grant's obviously been down in Brazil for a while now, covering things down there, and it looks good, and I can't wait. Next summer is going to be here before we know it.
Yeah, nobody's covering soccer on a global, and for me, always personally on a national level better than Sports Illustrated right now. So it's part and parcel to your work. So we appreciate it, Brian.
Yeah.
It is, Brian. It is. Thank you, man, and enjoy your rest of your December.
Thanks, buddy. Talk to you soon.
Brian Straus of Sports Illustrated. Always great to talk to him. Always great to talk to our second guest as well. He is from Comcast Sportsnet Houston, and he's Sebastian Salazar. He joins us right now. Sebby, hello, sir. How are you?
Great. Living the dream.
I don't even know what that means.
I don't either. It kind of gets me through on most things when people ask how I'm doing.
We talked to Brian Straus just a few moments ago, and his season never winds down as a journalist. You, though, do have a bit of a downtime as far as being able to take a step back from MLS. Do you like it, or do you stay plugged in through everything that's happening in the offseason?
I don't necessarily like it. I like the break from the travel. Like, the travel can kind of bog you down a bit because if anyone who knows me, I'm very unorganized. And when you throw travel into an unorganized schedule, it ends in pure chaos.
True.
So most of the last 12 months has just been lived in this constant state of chaos. But no, I mean, honestly, I'm counting the days. till March 8th. I'm ready for it to start up again. I can't wait for the Carolina Challenge Cup in Charleston. That's a kind of personal preseason favorite of mine, and I'll be there for that. So no, I can't really wait. And no, I do get a little bit bored this time of year.
I wanted to ask you, I didn't ask Brian, but I did want to ask you your thoughts on MLS Cup. Any major takeaways did you see, or was it just how it played out, just a deadlock between two really good teams?
I don't think that the conditions allowed us to see the total clash of styles that I had hoped. I really thought Kansas City, and I said this, somewhere else has a very real identity, and they stick to it. It's not always pretty, but it is effective, and it's very clear. You can swap Kansas City in and out of their jerseys, and you'd know pretty much who they were. And the same can be said for Real Salt Lake, and especially in the case of Salt Lake. Not that they played poorly, but they didn't play Salt Lake. They didn't play RSL, and I thought a lot of that had to do with the frigid temperatures and even more so the field. I think when the field is frozen, you're not going to have as good a quality a game, and a team that wants to play a little bit more quality ball is going to be impacted more. I think we saw that. I thought RSL did a great job to kind of adjust on the fly, make a game of it, and darn near win the thing on the road a couple of times, even into the penalty kick shootout. The drama was extremely, tense. I was in a newsroom in Houston where everyone was paying attention to college football. It's a big day of college football. And, once we got to penalty kicks, I wasn't the only one by my MLS Cup television. Yeah. That was cool to me. Everyone was gathered around. Everybody was into it. And there was a lot of questions being asked. At one point I had to tell everybody, listen, I don't want to explain it to you right now. I want to watch. So, but it was great. I love that role. And there was the great suspense of it. It'll be a memorable MLS Cup. I just, as a soccer nerd, I don't know that we got exactly the fight, the contrast of styles that I'd hoped for. I really thought we'd see something unique between those two teams.
We talked about, Brian and I talked about the Christ to NYCFC, that part of the story. The other part of the story is what happens to Real Salt Lake moving forward. And let me ask you it this way. Do they have to stay the course that has been laid out for them to continue to be successful? Or are there enough pieces in place for the team that, as it's assembled, that they can bring a different coach in who may have a different style and go a different way and still be successful doing it that way?
Well, it's interesting, right? I mean, Jason Christ is gone. Now his top assistant, CJ Brown, has moved on to. I think you'd be better off to stick to the system, but the system has to have a head, and I don't know that you can replicate that without Jason Christ. I think there's some ideas there that I think would be best off to stay in place. If I'm the owners of Real Salt Lake, I really like the bang for the buck that I've been delivered by Jason Christ and Garth Lagerwey. They don't spend that much money. They seem to know what they're doing in terms of identifying talent to fit this system. And so instead of finding a new system and trying to guess if the talent you already have will fit that system, or if you can guess the right type of talent for that system, I would assume you'd want to stick with what works. But that may be easier said than done. I don't know that there's another Jason Christ out there. So it's an interesting question to me. One of the real curious things about 2014 is what happens to RSL.
Yeah.
How much of this was Jason Christ? How much of it was the players? How much of it is Garth Lagerwey? I don't know the answer to those questions.
Well, and I think that's the reason I asked the question. And let me ask you to clarify, because you're the guy that I always go to break down tactics for me. You look at a guy like Schuler, who came into his own, a guy like Nat Borchers, who we don't know will be back, but let's assume he is. You still got Raimondo, you still got Beckerman, you still got Javier Morales if you want him, you still got Vero Sarbarrio. So is this like these pieces as they are good pieces? And if you decide to change the formation, is it a slam dunk that these pieces will work just because they are good pieces?
No, the most identifiable thing about RSL is the diamond, right? That the diamond in midfield is what kind of makes RSL different, unique. And the reason for that diamond, in my opinion, or from what I understand, is Javier Morales. So as long as you have a game-changing, big-time player in that position, and you have to assume that Javier Morales will continue to be that for them, and listen, they've been really good. If you look back at last offseason, they took 3 great players, and they said, we can move on without these 3 pieces. And they did so. As long as they say, okay, we can move on with Javier Morales doing this, I think in some ways you're almost married to that diamond in midfield because he plays that role darn near perfectly. And I don't know that he plays any other role. You know, we saw in Seattle, they tried to move Mauro Rosales out to the wing or to do something else with him, and he wasn't quite as effective. Diego Valeri, while Portland doesn't maybe exactly play that same way, he has that freedom in that role to be that kind of attacking central midfielder. And so I think if Morales is that guy and they judge him to be that guy moving forward, the system and the tactics and that diamond, I think, has to stay in place because that's how he's most effective and he's your best player.
And it's not a situation where if he moves on, you can plug Gil in there and continue along, or we're not married to the diamond if that's the case.
Yeah, I don't see Gil and Morales as the same player. And that's not a knock on Gil. I think he's a really good player. I just and in some ways more complete. I mean, he gives you more. I could see certain coaches being like, well, if I had to have one guy for one game, I could see them choosing Luis Gil over Javier Morales because a lot of coaches in MLS favor the grit over kind of that number 10 position. But not in the way that they play. I don't know that Luis Gil could step in and be that creative force. I saw some games live this year for RSL where Javier Morales made everybody around him so much better in the final third. And I don't know that Luis Gil is there yet. I don't know that he can't get there. But Morales is the essence of a playmaker, man. If you're a wing player or a forward, you salivate at the opportunity to play with a guy like that. And Luis Gil can create for himself. I don't know that he's there yet in terms of creating for others.
I don't want you to speculate on what's going to happen in 2014 or who your perennial favorites are for 2014, but I do want to ask you about clubs that you've got your eye on in the offseason. And I'd ask you to focus specifically on team personnel. So rather than an RSL and who they're going to hire as a coach or something like that, what team are you looking at thinking to yourself, this team either needs to make a revamp or they're 1 or 2 moves away from really establishing themselves as an MLS contender?
There's a few teams that I think are really interesting off-season stories. Columbus stands out to me. I think Greg Berhalter, Josh Wolf. You and I know Josh Wolf from DC United. Greg Berhalter, to me, seems to have all of the categories checked off to be a successful MLS coach. How does he translate? And I'm really curious what kind of player he's looking for, and I think we'll see that in the off season. You can guess all you want about, hey, here comes Greg Berhalter with all this great experience, but we'll know by his first few acquisitions what he's really into. We'll also know the commitment from Anthony Precourt and kind of the crew ownership. Where are they going with what they want to do in terms of spending money and maybe perhaps chasing a designated player or two, or not a designated player even, but just spending some big money there. I think it's obvious an interest to both of us what DC United will do. I'm curious in this age of MLS, back and forth and parity, what really is DC United? Were they really the third best team in the league last year? I know they weren't. Were they really by, 10 points the worst team in the league this year? I don't think so either. I think there's some talent there. I want to see what they put around it. That's kind of a personal, selfish one. Vancouver really intrigues me. I think there's some players there that have really, really high ceilings and haven't hit them yet. And San Jose is another team. I'm looking at kind of teams outside the playoff picture. But, San Jose scored a boatload of goals last year and then scored, 35 this year? How does a team go from so many goals to so little goals without really too much of a personnel change? So there's some interesting storylines there that I think will play out. But those are kind of the four teams outside the playoff picture that I'm the most intrigued by. And then really RSL, to me, I really want to see what's going to happen with that team. Seattle's super interesting. I mean, I don't know. You could look at every team and say, God, there's so much to go on because, we're hitting that period in the league, and I think we've kind of witnessed that over the last few months. All of these players, so many of the kind of original stalwarts of MLS are retiring, and we're really on the cusp of a new generation. And you really don't know what's going to happen. You don't know which teams are going to adapt to this new generation without the Matt Reeses and the Brian Kings and the Paolo Mastroiannis. Who's going to adapt the quickest to the next generation of American talent? So you could really make a case for any of the 19 teams.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing that I love about MLS is that, because there's so much parity, there isn't a big four, so to speak, like, say, in England, that every team does go into the offseason with expectations of, okay, we make some moves, we can compete. And, you brought up a lot of teams, and all of them have really fascinating storylines. And the one team that you didn't mention that I thought you would, or at least it's in my head, is what's going to happen with New York Red Bulls. I feel like the changes they made after the success they had was really interesting. And I asked Dax McCarty off air when he was on last week, is it an in Petke we trust situation? Because they are doing some revamping, and a lot of revamping for a team that won the Supporter Shield.
Yeah, I think you have to realize, too, though, that despite their success, there were a lot of weaknesses in that team, I thought. And I don't know that Espindola, Pierce, Pierce was injured. Espindola, to me, wasn't as critical. When you got to that team clicking at its best, neither of those two guys were really a part of it.
But I thought Brandon Barklage had a really good year, especially for the salary he was making.
Okay, but is he? Come on, Roach. Is he the guy? If in a situation where you've got to let some guys go. I mean, listen, it's Major League Soccer. If a guy has a good year on Brandon Barklage money, he's going to come and ask for a raise. And in this era of Major League Soccer, that's not going to work. You can't. If you're a Supporter Shield winning team, it's because you had some guys playing on low money that performed above their pay grade. They're going to come and they're going to ask for more money. That's totally within their right. Hopefully they can get it somewhere. But if you're New York and I'm looking at the guys they cut, I thought Carney was, the few times I saw him live, I thought he was a total sieve at the back, to be honest. I don't know how David Carney started in games. Brandon Barklage, yeah, I think he was fine for the most part. But other than that, I think that the numbers were always going to pop. There were some guys that they were going to have to pay more this year just to keep some of the European. Bradley Wright Phillips, I think, had a bigger number coming up. So, that's just cap management. I think the whole situation in New York is always something that's going to be interesting. The fact that they made it through this year without a total implosion, although I guess you could call it a playoff implosion, but won something. They finally won something. But I don't know that they can do that 2 years in a row without another total implosion. Now you're asking for 2 full seasons of peace and harmony. I don't. You'd be crazy to bet on that. So, New York is always kind of tenuous, but I don't know that if I'm a New York fan, the losses there don't scare me. Yeah, I think you've kept the most important parts of that.
But the interesting part for me is, Petke got the job at the last minute going into the season. I think he's got some credit this year to go to Red Bull and say, this is who I want, this is who I'm eyeballing, and it'll be interesting to see what kind of personnel he brings in, because he didn't have the chance last year because he was first year, and also because he got the job so late. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of player he feels is going to fit what he's trying to do as they move forward.
And again, that's another team for me, New York, that is beyond Henry and Cahill, I don't know that they're having – and Dax. I really – Dax to me is a critical part of that team. The Johnny Steele, Eric Alexander dynamic in midfield kind of made that midfield pop. When they were going, those three really seemed to work together. But outside of that, I don't know that New York had a real obvious identity. When you compare it to KC, when you compare it to Real Salt Lake. And maybe that's Petke's learning curve, or maybe that's just a reality. He stepped into a situation. He had great players. He said, hey, I'm not going to make you play a certain way. I'm going to put you in the best position that suits you. And that's also smart coaching and see what we can do. And they clearly accomplished some great things in 2013. But, again, I just don't know that lasts. And I don't know that he knows what the identity is. A lot of these coaches, I think there's two schools of thought in coaching in MLS. There's either I'm going to complicate the hell out of it, or I'm going to keep it really simple. And there's really very little gray area. And I think the further guys, the closer guys are to their playing dates, the simpler they tend to keep it. And the further they get, you start to see more tactics. And neither one is right or wrong. It all just depends on, really, at the end of the day, your ability to evaluate talent and put it in the right spot. But I can see Petke kind of going in that Ben Olsen, Dominic Kinnear role where it's more about keeping it simple, identifying the right players, and having them peak at the right time.
I wanted to ask you about a friend of ours who you covered all this season. I was a little surprised that that the Dynamo left Bobby Boswell exposed in the reentry draft, out of contract. But to me, the number that he was on didn't seem like it was outrageous. Did you see that much of a slip during the season that Dominic Kinnear would say, okay, we can move forward without this guy?
Yeah, I did. I really like Bobby, and it pains me to say this, but $220,000 may not seem like a lot, or whatever, $250, whatever it was. But in Houston, it is. This is a team that loves itself a bargain, and that has a very tight restriction on what it can and can't do. And Bobby had some solid games, but he also had stretches, and maybe it's because of his name and the resume and what you expect from a center back in his spot, where, he was part of a defense, and it wasn't all him, but he was part of the defense that really was loose, man. And you've heard me talk about the Dynamo this year, and I've told you point blank, there's no discussion on the MVP. There was only one person that could even be thrown in the ring, and it was Tally Hall. Well, if I'm telling you that, it's because the defense wasn't very good. Because they made the playoffs and made a very good run, and I'm telling you the goalie's the MVP, that means that the defense was giving him a lot of work. And whether it's fair or not, because of Bobby's resume, I myself, and I would assume a lot of other people say, okay, Bobby's the guy that's responsible. And a lot of that started in midfield. There was a lot of overturn in midfield, and the defense had to deal with a lot of that. And I think that the organization says, okay, if you're going to – here's the other thing. There's a lot of center backs in this year's draft. There's a lot of center back talent. And if there's ever a position, I think, where college players ought to be able to translate quickly and be MLS ready, it's into center defense, or maybe as an outside back, but really into central defense as part of a good pairing.
That's interesting that you would say that, because to me, the organization is a really big key to being a center back, and I don't feel like you could get that at the college level that would translate immediately to the pros.
Well, okay, maybe you can't get organization, but if you have a good goalie that's a very verbal goalie, and they have that in Tally Hall, and you've got good other pieces around, you've got your outside backs pretty much locked down, you've got, now the truth is Jermaine Taylor didn't have a great year either. So, maybe there's some question there in terms of what you expect from Jermaine. Eric Bruner is a guy that has all the physical tools, but A, has had some issues staying healthy, and B, has yet to kind of break into that full starter role to that level. I wouldn't be totally shocked to see Bobby Boswell end up in Houston at a lower number. The Dynamo are taking a gamble because Bobby, barring major injuries, is going to eat up those minutes. He's going to play most of those games, and he's going to play pretty well. But I think if you go back and you watch the tape, there were plenty of moments this year when you say, "Man, that's not the Bobby Boswell I expected." He was turned off on that player, that happens. That happens to every player. The issue this year was a lot of those plays ended up in either goals or in goal-scoring opportunities. Sometimes the center back, those plays, and I'll see a guy like Omar Gonzalez and think this quite often. His team shut off sometimes too.
Yeah.
But his mistakes didn't end in goals. And so then you don't question him as much, where you probably should, but you don't. And I think unfortunately for Bobby, his lapses ended in one-on-ones or in goals. And again, the lapses weren't necessarily just on him, but when you're the center back and you're the guy in the defense, really, the whole back four, include the goalie, the whole back five with the deepest resume, you're the one. It's like being a quarterback in the NFL. You're the one that's going to get the credit, and you're the one that's going to get the blame.
Okay, so having said that, I look at the list of people when everybody puts their list out of guys that they are looking at for a re-entry draft or would be a good fit, or somebody that multiple teams would go after. I haven't seen him on a lot of lists yet, which is making me scratch my head. Now, that could be biased in my relationship with him, and I'm thinking more this way than that way. I'm sitting in a city where we just dumped $500,000 into two center backs who were really bad for the entire year. And I think to myself, if Brandon McDonald and Dejan Jakovic are worth $200,000+, then a Bobby Boswell should be worth a $200,000+ deal, or at least that sort of stature of a deal.
Sure. Okay. But what did Matt Beasler make this year?
Nope.
Less than $200,000, right?
Yep.
So you can get not just a serviceable center back. You can get a top-level central defender for less than $200,000. So if you're paying more than $200,000 for that position, what you need to get on the field has to be way more than just serviceable. And so I think that the bar has been raised at that spot for that position, because the truth is, we don't spend money on defenders in this league. You spend money on attacking players, and you need to save as much as you can in defense and still be solid, and then have that money to go elsewhere, especially if you're a team like the Dynamo. Listen, Bobby Boswell still has some gas in the tank. He's going to be an MLS player next year, and he's going to find a home, and I wouldn't be surprised if he starts 28 to 30 games. I just think it has to be the right situation, and it probably has to be at the right cost. That's just the reality of becoming an aging player in this league. And central defense is a spot that when you start to age, people start to hack at that number pretty quick. Central defense is not a place where you can age gracefully.
I'm going to ask you a question. It's a big picture question, so hopefully I don't throw you on the spot for it. But in terms of the league in 2014, what do you think, or what are some of the things that you think are important milestones or things to accomplish? And I'm thinking stuff like locking down the TV deal, things like that.
Yeah. The TV deal to me is number one. Now, I have to be kind of careful because I work for one of the companies involved in the TV deal. But listen, I'll say this as a fan, and if anyone wants to complain, they can call me. The league needs a partner or partners that give it not only a set time, not necessarily a set time slot, but that give it a consistent time slot. I think that's number one. The league also needs to work with the TV partner or partners to make that happen. And I think whatever network it is, whether it's ESPN, whether it's NBC, and NBC has done a little bit of this. ESPN has its, ESPN FC and all that, which has also done a little bit of this. Fox now has this whole new Fox Sports 1 where, look, they're talking Champions League on The Crowd Goes Wild with Regis Philbin and former NFL players. Is it educated discussion? Meh. But they're talking about it because it's their property. And I think that's really key, is making MLS part of the discussion on a daily landscape, sports landscape type deal. How much did you hear over the last 3 weeks? How like, oh, MLS is still going on? MLS Cup came and went? Oh, well, you know what? If it's part of the daily discussion, then instead of saying, oh, did it happen? I forgot about it. It's like, oh, my God, we had 2 weeks of build-up to MLS Cup, and it's off. So that narrative can be changed very quickly with the right partner and all that. And then, of course, the money goes without saying. The influence that the money will have, to me, is very important. It's big picture stuff. Sure, we're curious about expansion, right? Like, I don't know. You and I had the last time I was in D.C., we did a 55-minute podcast, and then we talked for an hour about expansion.
Yep.
There's in the lobby afterwards. I mean, there's very little consensus on will Miami work? If it will work, how will it work? I have my ideas on it. I think you got to put a stadium darn near on the beach, and you got to make it really small, 15,000, to create that event field. That's from my understanding of Miami's kind of sporting culture. Atlanta, will Atlanta work? My God, listen, Atlanta has a million issues as a sporting town. I get the value of being in the Southeast, but are we going to throw up the 4 new teams that Garber announced during the All-Star game? Are we going to throw 3 right there in the Southeast? How valuable is that really to the TV deal? Sure, Atlanta's a big market, but, what does that mean otherwise? And I think we'll learn a lot about the ambition of MLS, the type of ownership it can attract. Because remember, at the end of the day, none of the expansion happens without one guy with a deep, deep pocket. So like San Antonio might be a great city for the Scorpions, but if the Spurs don't decide that they want an MLS team there, there's probably no one else in San Antonio that has deep enough pockets to make that happen. It's going to buy in at $50-60 million. So, then are we limiting MLS in terms of, do we go after big markets where the in-stadium product is going to suffer, or do we go after smaller markets where you're going to have an awesome stadium and an awesome brand, but your national imprint is minimized? And those are really identity questions for the league that it has to answer each time a potential suitor comes up. And that's the difference between an Oklahoma City and a Miami, or an Oklahoma City and a Atlanta. I don't know that MLS works in Atlanta, but I know that Atlanta works with the television company. And that's a tough fence to ride.
And Sebi is right. We literally talked about that for an hour after we recorded the podcast that he was on last. And you're right. We went around and around, and we didn't come up with a conclusion. So it's a great point. I don't know if 2014 it needs to be the answer, but they need to get closer to the answer of what they want to be as far as a long-term league, rather than what they want to accomplish with the next TV deal, or trying to marry those two issues.
Right. And the one thing we haven't talked about yet, which I have said repeatedly over the last 2 months, I've kind of always believed it, and I think everybody's talked about it. Brian Straus and Grant Wahl have written about it for Sports Illustrated. Steve Goff did a brilliant piece. Everything he does is brilliant for Washington Post. If there's one thing, if a genie popped out of a bottle and said, you can fix one thing about this league today, I wouldn't fix TV. I wouldn't, figure out expansion. I would fix the schedule, because I think the schedule fixes everything else after that. I think we're at a turning point with this league. And this year, maybe it was dramatic because of Gold Cup and World Cup qualifying, but we got hammered this year, man. The league took a 2-week break in the summer, huge games in the fall without your star players, 2-week breaks between the Eastern Conference Final first leg and second leg, another 2 weeks till the final. Like, the league suffered greatly because it doesn't have its schedule figured out. And we have to somehow sit down. The league has to get with its TV partners, and the league has to, get with its owners and decide what the best outcome is, how they can best maximize their momentum within the American sporting landscape. You're not going to be able to dodge the NFL and the NBA and the NHL. I'm not saying you need to do that. But there's something to be said for the fact that when MLS plays its biggest game, a lot of your fans are knee deep in the NFL, and they've forgotten about you. I mean, if I'm being totally honest, when I go back to my college days, I remember going to every DC United game when I was home for the summer. And then I would go to Western Pennsylvania in the fall to go to college, and nobody around me would be talking about MLS. And I would, follow and, catch the games when I could and follow on the website here and there. But I was not nearly as into it as I was a month before when I was in, when I was in the summer and in an MLS market. And I think, we have to figure that out because this league is not in a place where it can play second fiddle to that type of event.
You've made your decision for Carolina Challenge Cup. I would assume that you made your decision because it was made for you. I will actually be at the Pro Disney Soccer Classic, Sebi. So we'll be spending our preseasons apart this year. I'm sorry.
Listen, man, I've heard some, good. I know Disney's cool, and I know you've got the family. Do you take the family with you?
No, I take myself, and I get on all the rides by myself, and then I just watch soccer all day for 3 straight days.
All right. Well, the soccer part's great. The rest of it sounds kind of depressing. You might want to see somebody about that.
Wait, you're saying it's creepy when a guy by himself is in line to get on rides at Disney World?
Creepy is a strong word, but maybe a little bit. Look, I'll be flat out honest with you. The Dynamo are going to be there, and DC United are both going to be in Charleston. That's pretty much enough for me.
Yep.
But even I don't know if they weren't. Maybe I'd have to go wherever the Dynamo are going. But I love Charleston. I think it's a perfect setup for a few reasons. One, the fans there really seem to care. They are interested in seeing their guys go up against an MLS team, and it's almost in some ways their Super Bowl before the season. They get into it. The Battery are a wonderful host, a great facility. It's an awesome little stadium. A great pub in a stadium that's a really cool time. I love it. I've heard good things about Arizona. I've heard good things about Disney. And I know that the league itself has been very proactive in kind of helping those tournaments out and trying to make, Disney and Arizona a big deal. I will say this. I'm a little bit disappointed, or I will be a little bit disappointed if the league doesn't really understand and grab a hold of and start to champion what it has in Charleston. Because I think that is a unique event, and it's a really cool place to be at that time of year. And I think it's awesome, man. And I wish MLS would, get behind it a little bit more. I know in the last 2 years when I was there, I would kind of look at what was going on at Disney or last year, what was going on in Arizona, and say, boy, they're streaming all the games there. MLS is really starting to put some emphasis behind this preseason thing. And the coolest events that they have in preseason, they're ignoring. So I think maybe we forget about Charleston because the league tends to push it to the back burner. But I tell you what, man, Charleston is an awesome place to be. That's an awesome event. And you've got Seattle there this year. Man, for me, it's a perfect trio. But I think those are 3 really interesting teams and storylines right there that are going to be at that tournament.
Definitely. Although, I will say that I always enjoy myself in Orlando. And big picture, I do like the branding of a soccer spring training. Yes, 3 destinations would be ideal, and they seem to focus on the 2. But either way, I do like this soccer spring training type scenario or this environment that they're creating. And it is a great little way. It's a great trip to take wherever you go because, a lot of these clubs are winter clubs. So getting out, getting in the sun, seeing your favorite teams in a more intimate setting than you would around the stadiums in their hometowns is a lot of fun.
Yeah, I love it, and I think it goes. It's exactly what baseball does with spring training. It builds into your fan base. It makes it an event. It's another kind of brandable thing that you can claim as part of your calendar. Hey, it's February. I'm going to Charleston. I'm going to Disney. I'm going to Tucson. Whatever I'm doing, and I think it's great. I just don't want to see. I don't want to see in my opinion, the gem of it washed away because it may not make as much money for the league as a Disney partnership, or it may not be as convenient as Arizona. That's my only kind of thought on that. And I think it's actually a better fit if you've got 3 different locales, much like Major League Baseball has. They don't have everybody in one spot. It's impossible.
Yeah. Well, very well said, Sebi. Enjoy the rest of your holidays. I also wish a happy holidays to all the Pitch Pass listeners. Thank you very much for supporting us this year. We're going to go bigger and better next year. Pitchpass.com, at Pitchpass to follow us, at Sebi Salazar CSN to follow Sebastian. And have a great holiday, my friend. We'll talk to you next year.
Awesome. Can't wait for it. Mark Cape can't come soon enough.
Pitch Pass.
This is your voice. This is my red, white, and blue. This is my anthem to you.
For more show information, go to pitchpass.com.